Hello, Angelo John Lewis here for the Sacred Inclusion Network. In case you're not familiar with the network, we're a group of people who call themselves spiritual but not religious, and our mission is to give people tools who want to change the world in a way, and we have lots of different ways to do that. And if you want to learn more about us, please visit our website, sacredinclusion.com. This evening, it's my privilege to interview Dr. Apela Colorado, who's a traditional cultural practitioner and indigenous scientist who has Oneida and Gaul ancestry. She's the founder of the Worldwide Indigenous Science Network, which since 1989 has brought traditional indigenous and Western science together to preserve and protect indigenous knowledge systems and carriers of this wisdom for future generations. In equally measure shaman and academic, her accomplishments are many. She's a Ford Fellow who in 1982 received a Ph.D. from Brandeis University and went on to create the world's first doctoral program in traditional knowledge at the California Institute of Integral Studies. She also directed the Indigenous Mind program, which taught students for 20 years into ways of exploring their ancestral and earth-based holistic consciousness within an academic framework. She's the author of a recently published book, which she's about to hold up, hopefully, called Woman Between the Worlds, A Call to Your Ancestral and Indigenous Wisdom, which I've just finished reading recently, which is very inspirational. But the proof of the pudding is the woman herself. And first of all, welcome, Apela.
Oh, thank you, Angelo. I'd like to start our conversation today with a prayer.
Please.
And I have my cedar here that I'm lighting. You can see.
People can't smell it, but I can see it, so I'm visualizing it.
From the east to the west, rising sun to setting sun, the walk of life from birth to death. From the south, embodiment, family love, to the north, spirit coming in. Mother Earth, Father Sky, and all the life in between. In this in-between space, we come to you now, Angelo and myself and everyone listening around the spiritual fire. May our hearts and minds be one. In inclusivity, we come to you, and inclusivity, we mirror the wholeness of your divinity. And for this reality, we give thanks. Mama, Uanoa, all my relations. Amen.
Amen. Yeah, thank you so much for doing that. It's good to evoke and to recognize that we're not just material beings on this plane, and that we can be directed by those which are higher and those who came before us to share knowledge and wisdom. And you're going to be sharing most of the knowledge and wisdom. I'm just a humble vessel here. You know, one of the things I wanted to do here in this, I've been thinking about this for a while, is, I want to encourage you to share stories of your life. I could go through like the facts in the book or the facts with the WISN organization, but that really wouldn't convey the same sort of sacredness and, I guess, intensity that I want to happen. So the intent behind some of my questions are just that, to encourage you to tell stories. And I'll start with your background, and it kind of rang home to me because I'm a mixed race person, in that my mother was part Filipino and my father was African American, so I can relate. But your story is much more, I don't know, the worlds are much wider. At least they seem to me. So I know that you wrote that you grew up, that you got lost in your genealogies, Oneida and French Gaul. So I'm wondering if you could share a story that illustrates what it means to be lost as a little girl and a teenager growing up in the North Woods of Wisconsin.
Yeah, thank you, Angelo. Yeah, I remember, oh God, even when I was working on my doctoral dissertation 40 years ago, a really famous American Indian psychologist, Eduardo Duran. He and his wife at that time, Bonnie, we had just met each other, and they were both psychologists, Native American psychologists. And she said to him, Eduardo, do you notice that whenever Apela talks, everything she says is in a story? And I felt really happy about that. I said, wow, I am becoming an elder, even at that young age. It's like Native people, as you know, we talk in story form and narrative because that's where the holism lies. For me, as a young person, your question is about being like lost without knowing genealogies. And as I got ready for this call today, I was thinking about the book that I wrote. Here, look, plug, Woman Between the Worlds, gang. Anyway, I was thinking about that lostness and the emptiness, and it was really real. There was a lot of alcohol and violence in my upbringing in the North Woods of Wisconsin. But when I thought about that lostness now, I thought, wow, was it really the case? Like in an intellectual way, in a cognitive way in front of the mind? Okay, but the reality was where I was lost from that, I was embedded in nature. I grew up on a lake, Birch Lake, in the northern woodlands. And I had my grandfather's love when I could see him and when he wasn't drinking. And, to grow up like that in nature and to see like the stars and the Milky Way at night and to hear the cry of the loon on the water in the springtime and the rains and the thunderstorm and the wind moving through the evergreens. True, I was lost from the knowledge of my tribal stories, tribal history, those things that are human made that give rise to culture. Most of that I was lost to, but the good thing was that I was found in the reality of the living, vital Mother Earth. And just to show you an example, like about the lostness, even back in those days in the late 19th or early mid 1950s, I still had, my parents had taken me to enough movies, and the nearest theater was probably about 40, 50 miles away. And that was a long ways to travel then. But anyway, I'd seen enough movies that I knew about cowboys and Indians, and I knew Indians are supposed to be able to run through the forest without making a sound. So I tried really hard, we lived right in the woods, right? Snap, crackle, pop, Kellogg's Rice Krispies. No matter how hard I tried, no. And then I discovered something really wonderful. There was a Tamarack Forest, and Tamarack are quite endangered trees now. They're very, very dark evergreens with kind of sprightly sort of, I can't say really tendrils or leaves, but when they fall, it's like a pine tree. Nothing grows underneath. It's just a bed of needles. And I found out I could run on those evergreens down the hill to the lake, not a sound. So I had goals in my identity and my larger cultural identity. But the main thing that I experienced was the violence and the alcohol in my family. And I used to fall asleep at night, like crying and just wishing, please, just God, let it stop, let it stop. And I used to vividly fantasize of all the ways like I would go out and I would find this thing, this way of healing, and I would bring it back. And then my family would be okay, right? Over and over and over, that came to me. And I didn't know it, as a child, because all I saw is like, it's not working. Whenever I pray, it's not working. But looking back, I can see how that completely stood me upright on this Mother Earth for the things I was going to be empowered to do, including going to Indigenous communities where there's really, really grievous danger, maybe warfare or starvation, or that kind of early standing presence to horror, standing presence to incredible fear. I wasn't able to run from it at that time, but I was aware. And that awareness I came to earth with. And my grandfather, who was the last culturally practicing person in our family, he instilled in me that consciousness. And that consciousness came from his love and my love for him. I used to see my grandpa come through the door, and I would just go running for him. All the other adults, you had to be careful because you never know. They're going to be drunk, they're going to be sober, they're going to be nice, they're going to be scary. What? I saw him just run for him. And even to this day, and I say in my book, I can remember like the scratch of his plaid wool northern woodsman shirt against my child face, you know. So that love was my litmus test and my standard for navigating through life and knowing what's true and what's real.
Yeah, a follow-up to that is, I know that you're a Native woman, but you're also influenced by the Catholic Church. I mean,
Right.
those are two big things to put in one container to integrate. I mean, what was that like for you? I mean, you write in your book how you sort of reconciled as an adult to Catholicism, but say something about that if you would.
I'll give you a comparison. When I was about 4 years old, I know that because my brother wasn't born yet. We went to visit my mom and dad took me to visit some people. And there was this old white farmhouse, and there was a field next to the house that belonged to a man who had some money, and he was growing potatoes, and he had hired local American Indian people to plant the potatoes. And they were out in the field with their sacks over their shoulders, and it's backbreaking work. When I got out of the car, my mom and dad went into the house to visit their friends, and I went to the edge of the grass where the garden stopped and the muddy furrows were, and I stood there, and this full-blooded American Indian woman, she looked up at me, and there was this beautiful smile between each other of recognition. But I never got off the grass. I stayed there. It's like even then I knew I'm between the worlds, right? So as I was growing up, it got so the drinking and the violence, like people fighting with brothers, and so everybody fighting each other, and the weekends were just hell. And I noticed one day we had a one-room mission church in my little town, and the doors were open sometime, and I would look, and it looked so magical and wondrous, you know. And you have to remember, this is a time before internet, before YouTube, anything like that. And I looked in, and I could see the glimmer of the gold chalice, and I just said, whoa, some stained glass windows. I mean, just now, today, it's like your living room or mine is probably bigger than that mission church, but it was just a miracle to me. And I'm looking in and everything. And then some of the kids, Wednesday lunch, they would run up, they have to go to catechism lesson. So one day I asked my mom if I could go. I said, could I go there? And she said, although baptized Catholic, because French Indian, everybody's Catholic for forever on the French side. And she said, well, sure, but I don't know why you'd want to. And, you know, when I look back, I'm really happy about that, because my mom and dad never forced any religious or spiritual view on us. I mean, I wish they had maybe brought more of that into our lives, but if they weren't going to, I'm really glad they gave me freedom of choice. So I said, yeah, I want to go. So show up for the catechism lesson, and the nun that was there turned out to have been a classmate of my mother's, and she asked me my name, and I told her, and I asked her, can I be here? I think she was floored, because she didn't expect a 9 or a 10-year-old kid to show up saying, I want to come for catechism lessons, right?
Right.
And she says, well, okay, if your mom and dad, if your parents know. I said, yeah, they said, okay. So that was it. And I remember, like, I used to just like smell ink on my catechism book. I just absolutely just loved it. And on Sunday, when I would wake up and the stove had gone, the wood stove had grown cold because people were drinking over the weekend and didn't keep wood in the fire and stuff. Wake up and it's cold, and I would run to that little one-room place, and just life was beautiful to me. And I think I would have stayed on that Catholic path, except two things happened. I ran into a pedophile priest, and he didn't get me. I got away from him because my spidey instincts from growing up in addiction, I could feel sexual perversion from a mile off, right? So I got away from him. But the day of First Communion, like, I was told that when you have the host, that you receive the body and the blood, the spirit of Christ. And I just couldn't wait, right? So communion comes, I get the host on my mouth, and I waited, and nothing happened. And I went outside that one room mission church, and I stood under the tree for the longest time. I was so sad. And then I asked one of the kids, like, did anything happen to you? And one Bobby said, oh, that's stuck on the roof of my mouth. Richie said, I just chewed mine. Oh, sister said you can't do that. You're not supposed to chew it, right? And everybody ran off to play. And I stood by that tree thinking for the longest time. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's a ceremony of some sort. You know, I mean, Catholic Church. I remember when it was kind of magical. Now it's, in my mind, it doesn't seem that magical because it's all in English, and they've kind of like tried to make it pretty for everybody. But in any event, you're a Native woman, and you talked about your grandfather. So at some point, you must have been exposed to Native ceremonies, and so was that a different experience for you than this disillusionment about the host not working?
The thing is, when you're a kid, you're like, what did I do wrong?
Yeah, right. Right.
Don't think like, geez, should I criticize the way the church is? You're just like, wow, I missed it, So, and then I run into this pedophile priest, and that's it, I'm done, right? So by the time I reached my late teens, the American Indian movement was just coming out, along with the civil rights movement, and I heard that. One day I walked into my parents' house, and television was on, like 6 o'clock news or whatever, and there was Russell Means at Wounded Knee, and he had his hair long, much like my hair is right here, but he had an eagle feather on the side of his head because Russell knew how to look good, right? Yeah, later he became an actor, but he was also a really, really committed American Indian activist. I don't mean to make light of that. So Russell Means was there, and the church from Wounded Knee was behind him. And he was saying how the treatment of American Indians and how we want our lands and justice and so forth. And the wind caught the eagle feather, and I'm like riveted. I couldn't eat. I just like, that's my truth. That's it. And I ended up in my master's program. One of my mentors there was Dr. Robert O. Washington, an African-American man. And up to that time, my family moved to the city when I was like 15, and I was in this big, big city high school. So I went from an 8th grade graduating class of 4 to a high school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin of 3,000. So then I was more lost, right? So, I mean, and I didn't fit in and all this kind of, typical high school stuff. But okay, so when I get to my university program, and now I'm in my master's already because my grandfather had advised me to do that. He said, to the whole family, when Apela grows up, she's going to go to university. But he also told me right before he died, the other part, which thank God he did, he told me, remember the pipe. And that helped me get through all of that university stuff, right? Okay, so I'm in my master's program, and Dr. Robert O. Washington is the assistant dean of the program. And one day he comes up to me, and I just in the city learned to live as a non-native person. I thought, although my heritage was always questioned by white people, oh, what nationality are you? And by American Indians who are full blood, like, mixed blood, right? Sell out, right? Whatever. So always that between place. And I was getting really, really at risk. So around that time, the American Indian movement's going, as I said, and Robert O. Washington, after a class one day, because I was a really good student, straight A, and he came up to me and he said, Apela, I hope you don't mind me asking you this. He said, but what nationality are you? And I could feel my face just burning, right? Like, oh God, the secret's out. And I said, well, I'm American Indian. And he said, I thought so. It's like, oh my God, everybody knows. That was my feeling at the time. Everybody knows. Thought it was a secret. So he said, I have a field placement for you if you're interested at the American Indian Council on Alcohol. And it happened that that storefront community center was the national headquarters of the American Indian movement.
Oh, really?
Through that, I got to know like practicing American Indian healers, and I got to be in my first pipe ceremony, into my first sweat lodge. And the pivotal moment to finally answer your question in this maybe too long story is I was in a peyote ceremony, which I didn't want to go into because my Western mind said it was a drug. And I thought, I don't need any more drugs in my life. I grew up in the era of sex, drugs, rock and roll, and I watched what happened. I never drank, but I smoked pot, I tried speed, I did other things, and I just said, no, I don't want it. But my one relative, Dorothy, said, Apela, you're coming into that ceremony tonight, because she saw my at-riskness. You're coming to the ceremony tonight. I have to drag you kicking and screaming. All right. So I'm sitting there, and the drum, the water drum, is going, and there's chanting going on. The fire's crackling here, and I'm watching this green mason jar of peyote come close to me. Like, oh God, wow, right? All right. So they hand me the staff. You got to hold the staff. It's got eagle feathers, and then I have to eat this dry stuff. And I'm like, oh God, what now? And then, of course, because it's a fungus that's dried, you better swallow that fast because it swells in your mouth. So, all right, oh, I get it down, right? And I'm looking at my relative, Dorothy, I think I'm going to get you for this, So I pass it on like that. And I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking, now what? And I'm waiting because I knew about drugs somewhat. So I'm waiting for what I call the rush to happen, right? Where's the rush? Well, what the rush happened was a big surprise to me. It was like I was in a complete black room, and a shade lifted, and I saw this just pure white light come over me of spirit, of holiness. And I'm like, oh, wow. What I thought was darkness, this sacred way, it really is sacred. And what I thought was normal, like pot and everyday life, that's the darkness, right? So I said the next morning when everybody was talking, the medicine man said, well, Apela, he was like kind of like trying to get time. We're waiting for Dorothy to bring in the three sacred things, like three sacred foods in the morning that ends the ceremony. And there was a delay. So I was passing the staff around and asking people to talk. What was your experience last night? And nobody was talking much because everyone was in this beautiful state of mind from praying all night and everything and singing. And he says, well, Apela, what about you? And I held that staff, and I'm telling you, Angela, when I held the staff with the feathers, I felt it move as if it were like the back of the eagle. And I said, this is what I have been looking for.
Wow.
And I passed the staff. He said to me, he said, that's it. That's all you got to say. Because I was the only one going to university and stuff. And you usually have a lot to say, right? So, so that was that chapter.
Wow.
Later on, I had to come back with love to my Catholicism, but it was this moment that put me both feet on the ground, like ready, set, go. I know who I am.
This academic thing that's part of you is, I mean, it's just interesting. I mean, I used to work at Princeton University. I must have met one Native person in that situation. Here you are. You're from the Midwest. I can't imagine that even though there's probably like a coterie of people that were part of the American Indian movement with you. Uh, that's just an enormous journey. It really is. It's probably second nature to you. But what was it like? Here you are. You've gone through the sort of the pinnacle. You've got a PhD and everything like that, and yet you've managed to some extent, and I shouldn't say to some extent, to hold on to your roots, and that kind of defines who you are in a certain sense, kind of bringing these worlds together. But I must imagine there's some sort of sense of displacement in there at some point, trying to meld these two words and trying to be this woman in between the worlds and hold both of those kind of things together. And what was that like for you? I mean, I know this is a while ago, but it couldn't have been easy.
No, it was really, I was the only American Indian in the at the University of Wisconsin at the time. And although, I mean, in that way it was good, I was culturally estranged, because if I'd been even more solidly cultural, I don't think I could have made it, right? Because I like this, talking in stories and so forth. Well, that's not the way science is done in those days. But anyway, going to the East Coast and getting into an Ivy League school, my late husband, Joe, was full-blooded Apache and long black braids. And um, he would drop me off for my classes in front of the Heller School, had some short, stubby pine trees in front of it. Um, and he would drop me off in our beat up Ford Pinto. And one day, like, the students there were of such wealth, I saw a limousine come up, and the chauffeur gets up, opens the door, and a young woman with ripped up jeans steps out of the limo, and the chauffeur is opening the door and holding it, and she's got her arm full of books, and a friend comes up and she's talking, and the chauffeur is just standing there and waiting till she's done gossiping with her friend or catching up, and then she comes into the Heller School to classes, right? But before she got in, she noticed Joe and some of her friends, and they stepped right between me and him, because he was the exotic, dark Native male, and I was nothing, right? It's just like, I mean, I could see it. It was like, excuse me, ladies.
Right.
I mean, it was also really beautiful to look at, really, I could see why they were attracted to him, but it was, yeah. Anyway, so that's the kind of stuff that happened, the estrangement. And I had to take 3 semesters of statistics,
Oof.
which made yeah, exactly. Oof. So I didn't even know what I was doing. And computers back then, they hadn't invented the PC yet. So our first computer, it was like, they have something called mangles. They're to iron sheets on, and they're like 2 rollers with like sheet covers, and they go around like this, and you feed the sheet through a big sheet for a bed. Okay, our first computers were like that, but they had like these scary metal teeth that went, and you had to write a program. And then you had to say like what your research question was. You have to program the thing with the teeth. And then you come back in 2 or 3 days and you get cards with holes punched in them, right? I didn't know what I was doing. No idea. I was supposed to be all scientific, and from that prove something, Out of that, I think I really learned good, like, reasoning and questioning in a Western way. But I also knew, like, it seemed like truth was too equivocal in the scientific way, and that truth could be whatever your design was strong enough to make it be. So I said, yeah, no, there's more to life than this, right? So there are a lot of things like that in my doctoral program, but the main thing was just, it was terrifying. Then again, I was the only Native American. fortunately, there were 2 or 3 African Americans there, and we teamed up, to try to survive the process. But one morning stands out to me. From my Oneida or Oneida people, the white pine is sacred to us. So I get ready, park my car in the parking lot, go up to the Heller School. And as I said, there were these small pines out in front. And I remember one morning, the trunk of the tree was only this big, right? I'm holding on to that tree, and I was so terrified I was throwing up to go into my classes. And I made a promise. I said, if I get out of this, no, when I get out of this program, I'm going to set up a doctoral program for Indigenous people, so no Indigenous person would ever have to go through this again. And that's what I have done.
Wow. Just to go back a little bit, you said this sort of in passing. You said your grandfather said, "Remember the pipe." Now, maybe some people are listening to this have no idea what you're talking about. So maybe you can explain a little bit about the sacredness of the pipe in the Native tradition.
Yeah, they're actually, in reality, the pipe is real, but it's also a metaphor that every human being on earth can understand. The pipe is Mother Earth, the embodied part of life, and the stem, which is made out of the branch of a willow, it's the living part, which is, of course, the hardest part, like living the spiritual truth. It's life. And when you put the two together, when you consecrate the worlds like that, it's a sacred moment. And every grain of tobacco you put in is an aspect of the prayer, of acknowledging reality, giving thanks, and opening ourselves to what can be. And part of the pipe, even what I have here right now, if you were here, you'd see I have water here, and I can't have a fire because I'm in an office, but I have a candle. I have my altar cloth and my smudge, and all of these are elements of the creation of life. So every prayer we do, it's a recreation of the fire of life every time, right? That's the thing I feel like we're really looking for today, all of us. And I really had to look for that on my French side, which is, what is our creation story? How do I find myself in it again, in my creativity? Those are the original blessings and instructions of the creator, creatress in Naoniata Agawe.
I feel that your story is a little bit extreme, quote unquote. However, it seems like a metaphor as to where we all are in a certain sense. I mean, at least in this Western world, all of us are looking for something in us which is something which is a little bit more organic, something which is not so what's the word? Something so right brain or something like that. And at the same time, we all have a heritage. You had to find it from the French side.
Yeah.
But there's something universal about your story, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
It's unique, but it's universal, and that gives you the license to do what you do.
I say that childhood prayer I was telling you, where I want to heal my family. What could it be to heal my family? And I didn't know what that was leading to, but in searching for, in my dream, I want my family to be whole. And what I didn't know is that the whole earth is my family.
Right.
And how I got to see that wasn't just I had a thought, kumbaya. What happened is, through my work with no plan, I was taken, just imagine the trajectory as I say it. I was taken to the painted caves of the south of France, and I'll come back to that in a moment. They're about 40,000 years old. I was taken to indigenous people in Central Asia, and I was taken to Ethiopia and to South Africa. And when I was in South Africa, I was mentored by this beautiful Zulu elder named Baba Credo Mutwa. I had a mystical experience there. And from that experience and talking with Baba, he explained to me that that spot where that experience happened was the place where the star beings came to Earth. And they had the desire to create a civilization based in love, right? Ethiopia, you all know, is Lucy, one of the oldest humans ever found there. And Central Asia is a diaspora point. If you follow science's story of creation, we all come out of Africa. At some point, we're in the Central Asia area, and then we scatter to the directions. And the Central Asian people I know, the Kyrgyz people, they have that oral history of the last fire when we were all one, and then we went in different directions. And the painted caves in France, they hold that moment of 40,000 years ago. And there's one animal in there that Baba Mutwa had never been to those caves, but he knew when I was getting ready to go there the first time, he told me to be alert because there's an animal in there that only exists in South Africa in Lascaux Cave. Sure enough, it was
Wow.
there. Right? Yeah.
Wow.
So in my search for family wholeness, my journey of life, and I'm just an everyday person. I don't have lots of money or anything like that. But I ended up through my work being to all these places. And then I stood back and I said, oh, I've just traced the journey of humankind, trying to restore wholeness to our family. Now that's inclusivity, indigenous wise.
I read your book. I've gone through it a couple of times, and what struck me when I was thinking about talking to you, it's like a story of a vision quest, and you've gone through enormous difficulties which we haven't talked about at all. I mean, I remember this one story where you're petrified about going into a cave because you've got claustrophobia, but you made yourself do it. You talked about the childhood that you have, which is not like roses or whatever, but you had a vision that you followed, and in some cases there were totems and signs that you knew you had to follow, and one of the stories which I hope you'll tell at least to some extent had to do with the raven, and how the raven's journey and how seeing the raven gave you kind of insight as to what the next step in life was for you. Can you maybe that's a kind of a long-winded question, but
that's a really good one, because when you're going to go through change, transformation mythologically is epitomized or iconized in all kinds of different beings. It can be like the fox, it can be
eagle,
right? Yeah. So, but in this case, I'm on the Northwest coast, and we're going to talk ravens here. Okay, so maybe some of you listening will be able to relate with this moment in life, but I finished my Ph.D. and because I went to Ivy League, I had this thought like, boy, when I get out of this with this degree, there's going to be employers lined up at the door. That's what I thought, because it was so hard for me to do, right? So anyway, I thought that's how it worked. I didn't know that people that went to Ivy League have like brilliant careers assured because they come from really well-to-do families and they're very connected, and school is just part of their training for the world they live in. So I graduated and nothing. And it was 10 and 11 months later. I didn't even have money to pay my graduation fees. There's $1,500, and Brandeis wrote me a letter and said, if you don't pay it, we're going to rescind your degree. So then my car payment was due and I had little kids. Oh, it's just a nightmare. Couldn't find work. I was in Southeast Alaska. You can read the book if you want to know how that happened. And in Southeast Alaska, I was adopted into the Raven clan of the Tlingit and the Haida. So then raven is it's a beautiful bird there in the rainforest. It's huge. It looks almost the size of an eagle. And the raven is the oldest bird there. and there's two clans, Raven and Eagle. The Eagle came later. So the Raven is the clan that carries all the stories and everything. And it is a trickster, and there's all kinds of story. Raven does everything upside down and backwards, like, can I tell you just a moment of a traditional Raven story?
Sure,
Angela?
please. Yeah.
Okay, so this story, according to my mentor, Chief Donawak, a Raven Tlingit storyteller and chief, he said this. He said, this is the first story. This story comes from before the Earth's crust was healed or was formed. There are no stories before this story. Okay, so what's the story about? In summation, the story is there's a white raven spirit, which is, pure and mystical. And then there's our black raven spirit, just always in trouble, and the one we mostly identify with. And everything he does, like, is backwards and upside down, but it always works out good, usually for human beings, if you survive it. And it's okay for Raven because he's a spirit and he can never die, right? Mm-hmm. So, all right, the first story, Raven and White Raven are in a boat and they're out jigging for halibut. They're like a string fishing for a certain kind of enormous fish, right? So they're out there, and then Black Raven, just being like the troublemaker is, he looks at White Raven and he says, "I'm older than you." And White Raven doesn't say anything, being a magnanimous spirit bird. A little while goes by, and then Black Raven says, "I'm older than you." And White Raven says, "You say that again, I'm going to break fog on you. That you're going to be sorry because we're being lost out here in this ocean," right? A little bit of time goes by. Sure enough, Black Raven says, "I'm older than you." So White Raven picks up his hat, his spruce wood woven hat, puts it on his head, and everything just sucked in fog. You cannot see the shore. You don't know where you're at. Totally scary, right? Some time goes by. Black Raven says, "I'm older than you," in the fog. And then after a while, more time goes by, and Black Raven says, "I'm older than you," but his voice is changing. By the third time, he says, "You're older than me," right? So White Raven takes off the hat, and the problem is solved. You see the story. So the first story ever told, the moral of the story is never put ourselves over another human being. Keep ourselves humble, keep ourselves low, they say. So that's the first Raven story ever told. Okay, so here's me. Now I'm out of my doctoral program and I have no money, and bill collectors are starting to call, and I've got kids to take care of. I got 3 little kids. I'm a single parent. I'm just beside myself. So I leave the house and I go down to the stream. And the stream in Southeast Alaska was an area where gold miners had come through, and it just devastated the land, so that either side of the stream was just not even soil on it. It was just hard pan, right? Back 10 or 15 feet, the trees and bushes and everything, the thick boreal rainforest was intact. Right here on either side of the stream, devastation. So I walked down there and I knelt on that cold, damp sand, and I wept. I put my head in my hands. I just wept. I just didn't know what to do. And across the stream, kind of a like low, but water moving fast, clear, icy clear stream running off a glacier. Across this sandy creek, I look, and there's a big raven marching around there. And he's looking good, like iridescent green, purple, like, wow, look at me, I look at him, and because he's the head of a clan, I say, "Isn't there a raven who would help me?" I'm kneeling there, and I hear this snap behind me, and I jump up, and the raven across the stream flies right to me, comes above me, and is hovering with his wings over me like this, And I look up like this, my hands like this, and I'm tears going down my face. I cannot believe it's happening. And another raven is flying around me, like maybe just 3 feet out at the most from my body, circling around me and tumbling upside down in every way, like nothing refined about it. And this one is above me. And when they're done with that, they both go down the stream towards the Gastineau Channel. And it was so like, I wanted to go after them, and I started to go after them for the moment of closeness with, I'll say, God, right? For that moment of unity with life. I'm going after it, and I stopped. No, no, no. Enough. You got the gift. Enough. Don't pursue it. Leave it. Accept it. So, because my half here, my half white side, there's never enough, right? It's always scarcity. But my native side is receive, accept, give, share, right? Okay, so, all right, I let it go. And I turn and I'm walking back to the stream. I look down, and there in a little indent, a dip in the sand in the eddy, gold dust. Gold dust. The answer to my prayers, like I can pay my bills, I can feed my kids, everything's going to be all right. And then how am I going to do it? I've never panned for gold in my life, right? And I'm thinking of all these ways I could get the gold and what I'll do with it. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute. I look at that stream, like, if I get this gold, I have to take it to an assayer's office. And then I have to say, where did I get it? When I say where I got it, gangbusters, everybody back here again, destroying this. I can't do it. I said, I can't, I just can't. So, but I need the money. I have to, but I can't. But yes, no, yes, no. And in the end, I left it. And for many years, I asked myself, should I have taken that gold or not? Was it a blessing that, like, I said no to a blessing that was an answer to a prayer, or was it a test? And if you want to know the answer, guess what? You have to buy my book, Woman Between the Worlds.
And as you're relating the book, I'm sure there are people that you've run into says you should have taken the gold.
Yeah, my husband tells me all that. Even to this day, my husband says you should have taken that gold. You could have done it this way, whatever, you know. Yeah, oh, you'll see what happens when you read the book. Yeah.
You know, I don't want to leave this conversation because, you know, I'm trying to give people a sense of what Indigenous wisdom really is. And one way that might be useful to do that is to tell us a little bit about your mentors. You know, you didn't learn all this stuff that you do in isolation. You had people that helped you understand sort of how things are. So I wonder if you could share just a little bit about maybe one or two of your mentors and who they were and kind of the power that they had.
The first one was my grandfather. He exemplified it. He never ever, like, his way of disciplining would that he would just disappear or retreat, and I would catch myself and be scared because his love suddenly wasn't present. He oriented me, and the North Woods was my mentor. And I knew because of my grandfather, because of the North Woods, I could feel and know truth when I encountered it. And those two things, like later in life, when I started really deeply searching for my Indigenous identity and spirituality, you know, what I was actually looking for is my closeness to God, Goddess. That's, you know, what we all want, that love, that connection to that divine love, right? We all need it. We thrive with it, and we long for it when it's missing. So as I looked for this, that love between my grandfather and I, he passed away when I was about 15, but somehow I was always able, as I traveled around, to encounter these medicine people that were really authentic, beautiful, like, I'll say like Gandhi, like, you know, just human beings with shadow and light. But when you meet them, you're like, I can remember thinking, oh, that's who I want to be when I grow up. You know, you feel the goodness, you feel the presence of the numinous, right? It's like, oh, you know. So I would meet these people, and then I remember one medicine man who was like a warrior medicine man, Kaulidi, Kiowa. And he said, girl, I don't know why I let you so close to me, right? And that was a strange thing to say. And then I thought, like, wow, it's true. I have this weirdo gift. Like maybe like I'm not such a cultural person that I know the ins and outs of everything, but I'm like a magnet to these healers, right? And the magnet was the love between my grandfather and I. And I looked for that after he passed. I looked everywhere for it. And I found it through these teachers. And getting to your, like, giving an example, one of the people that I was so close to and just still love so deeply is Chief Danawak, who I mentioned was Raven Clan and storyteller. And he could speak and Tlingit for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, telling a story and then stop and tell it in English in this, just without hesitation. And English was probably a very distant second language for him. Anyway, just being with him in Raven House and sitting by his wood stove and having the smell of, they call it in English, not a nice name, Devil's Club, but kind of like minty, sour smell for purifying. And he'd always have it boiling on a stove. And he would tell me the stories of Raven. And from that, I learned what a story is, kind of how to feel when the spirit of a story is present, and to learn in my own life how to trust that. Like, if you tell me a story, Angelo, from your culture and so forth, I'm going to believe you. That's how I would think at the time. But if it comes through me, I probably wouldn't trust it, right? When I wrote this book, Woman Between the Worlds, it's me, like, saying thank you to Danawak and all my teachers and saying, all right, as unworthy as I am, as mixed blood as I am, as whatever I tell myself I'm not, in love, we are one. And I am.
You studied at all these highfalutin universities, and at the same time, there's this indigenous science, and we haven't really, we've just barely we haven't really touched on it at all. And it's important for people to understand a little bit about what the Worldwide Indigenous Science Network is. So I guess what I'm trying to get to is that everybody knows what Western medicine is, for example, or Western science is, and it's given us a lot. But people don't have a sense, maybe some people do, as to what indigenous science is. So can you speak about what indigenous science is and why it's important to kind of bridge these two worlds?
Okay, so one quick answer is all what we've been going through in this conversation, the way I talk to you, this is indigenous science, right? It's what you knew if you were lucky to have a grandma and grandpa who still that kind of knew who they were and what their culture was. It's transmitted with love. Doesn't always mean it's warm and fuzzy. It can just be kick-ass, knock down, drag out truth too, right? But it's real. And one old medicine man put it this way. He said, don't listen to me. Don't follow me. I'm a man. I'm a person. I might mislead you, but you can trust these ways, like the ways of ceremony, the ancient indigenous ceremony. And if you don't have that, you can trust the ways of nature. Like one grandma told me, like, a tree doesn't pretend it has leaves when it doesn't. A tree doesn't go by statistical probability. It's in bloom or it's not. So partly it's that, but there's a sophistication too that if, the best example sort of in the Western mind is when we think about the Mayan calendar. If you think about the profundity that's in the mathematics there in the Mayan pyramids, a clock more precise than the atomic clock, that's an example we can readily understand. But how we position ourselves so that we can be a part of the whole. Actually, we are a part of the whole, but wake up in that moment. That's what ceremonies are really good for. And the quickest way in the academic program, if I can get into that for a moment, we're just admitting our first students to the United Nations University for Peace in Costa Rica. And we have a master's, and then it will be a Ph.D. in Indigenous Science and Peace Studies, right? Why not? That's where your inclusivity lies, right? That's what we're talking about in Indigenous science. All my relations, but the truth, to be real, must be lived. And the way to live it, if we've been estranged from it, like I was, you make yourself an altar, an ancestral altar, and you put pictures there, and you have a symbol of each of the elements, right? And one student told me years ago, because I've been working on this program for 30 years, right? One student told me, of Irish descent, if all I have are my ancestors and prayers, it's got to be enough. And it is, right? As soon as you do that and say, ancestors, it's me, whatever your name is, I'm checking back in. We never remembered you so long, but I really need your help now. I want to remember and know who I am and what is my indigenous spirituality, what is my indigenous ceremony, what is my truth, right? You make that prayer humbly, and also like say like, and maybe you don't want to help me because we just ignored you for so long, but we didn't know. And please, please forgive me. I really need your love and help. Okay, you do that, right? Shazam, dreams come, synchronicities happen. You bump into people, doors open, doors close, right? And the way before you is there. It's all of our birthright, this indigenosity. Well, one thing that's really, really important, it isn't only a question of remembering all this beauteous truth and relatedness. There's history to account for. On my French side, I had to reconcile myself with that in a visit to Senegal, West Africa. And when I was there at a conference, a friend of mine is from Benin, and he's a Voodooan priest, and he's also a medical doctor. He organized a program to bring traditional practitioners and Western medicine together, because in West Africa, not many Western doctors, right? But probably you wouldn't know it, but 30 years ago, there weren't many traditional healers in West Africa either. And Eric Bedozo's job when he got out of medical school was to travel around and try to find authentic surviving Voodooan healers. And the way he did it, he said, is that he would go into a community and he would ask the kids, he would tell the kids, oh, I have this or that, I cut my foot or I have a toothache or whatever, who should I see? And the children would always take him to the right ones, right? Now his program, bringing this traditional and Western medicine together, is in something like 27 countries in Africa, Indonesia, and I think in Brazil as well. Okay, so Eric has this conference he's organized, and I'm there. We had a field trip. We went out to this place called Guri Island. And as I approached, I felt, I mean, it looked beautiful, white sand and bougainvillea and sort of adobe looking buildings. And it looked like something like a fort with an adobe wall. And the closer we got, the worse I felt, just like ice through me. And I was also recovering from radiation. So I was really sick at the time. So I had breast cancer before that. So we're getting closer. And what happened and what I detail in the book is my encounter with my French history, where people were sent off to, this was the African diaspora, the origin, and Africans were taken as prisoners there. And it's important to remember, like we have this in our American Indian history, it wasn't only evil white people. We Native people had to betray our own people for slavery to happen, whether it was red people or Black people. And that shadow is really the liberation Okay, but anyway, back to the evil French people, of which I was a part. So I get in there, and then I realize in the horror of what we're seeing, because they take us through where people were chained up and horrific things happen, mothers and babies separate, just horrible stuff, and a pit recalcitrants were thrown into. And then we get up this tower, and there's this window in this stone tower, and down below are rocky shoals and shark infested waters, and it's called the doorway of no return. So people that were going to be sent into slavery had a choice where they could jump out the window to their death, or they could get on the ship and become slaves. So I'm there, and I realize when I'm there that who did this and who lived upstairs in luxury were French people. And I had to feel the horror of that. And also I was near death myself. And I leaned against the wall, like just sobbing. And it seemed like I could hear the screams of the people. And I jump away from the wall, and I can't get away because I'm in a mob of people. And we're finally exiting downstairs and out through the doorway. And the main healer, Mami Wata, is in the crowd over there. He doesn't speak any English, but he looked, and the other thing, I looked around the crowd, and I'm American Indian to me. But at the time I said, wow, I'm the only non-Black person here. I am the white person. I am the white person. I had to feel that and be that. And I'm just like, wow, if I feel that, I'm near death, or I'm going to die, right? And Mami Wato gets kind of pushed by the crowd past me. He looks and he smiles and he says, hello, my sister. Oh, how could he do that? How could he have that forgiveness, So I don't know if that answers your question about Indigenous science, but it's a science of love and life, if I speak in altruistic words. But there's real also know-how and skill and lifetimes of learning and intergenerational transference of knowledge as well.
Yeah, that's the kind of healing we all could use right now. The planet is sort of purging itself right now, and I mean, personally, I feel that what you're doing is important for all of us. I like to think I'm a little bit a part of it also. But anyway, I want to end by recommending the book, which I've read. Hold it up again if you like, if you would.
Yeah. Thank you.
This is a woman who's truly she's been between the worlds, and I think I can say that all the things that she's been through are in support of who she is right now. Not just being between the worlds, but bringing the different worlds, the indigenous, the sophisticated Western, all these kind of things are embodied in her and her work. I encourage you to go to her website. I think it's WISN.org, WISN.org, and learn more about what she's doing. Let me just tell people a little bit about the Sacred Inclusion Network, and then I'll say goodbye formally, at least for this round.
Excuse me, Angel, I have to tell
Please.
people you need to type in Worldwide Indigenous Science.
Worldwide, yes.
If you type in WISN, you go to a TV station.
Worldwide Indigenous Network, right. And you say, what were those people talking about? This is not the right thing. In any event, you want to learn more about the network, and we have lots of guests and activities. Sometimes we invite people like Dr. Colorado to join us and lead us in ceremony, I'll say. Go to our website, sacredinclusion.com. We also have a monthly event, which you can find out about. But in any event, Dr. Apela Colorado, it's been an enormous pleasure. I hope this is just the beginning of our relationship and not the end. And, thank you so much.
Yeah, and we thank the ancestors. Amen. Thank you.
Amen.